Hello. This is part 3 of the cosmic history video presentations that I'm putting together. We're going to jump into the third seeding on Earth. And when we last left off, the 1,000 Years' War had just ended. And unfortunately, the sphere of Amenti had to be removed once again from Earth's core at the end of this war. And this was about 849,000 years ago. The sphere of Amenti was placed in the Andromeda galaxy because it was no longer safe from Anunnaki operatives on Earth. There were a couple of guardian groups that developed during this time. We have the Syrian-Arcturian Coalition for Interplanetary Defense. We also have the Interdimensional Association of Free Worlds. And that particular organization extends well into some of the higher harmonic universes. So these organizations provided protection for Earth. The Pleiadians also offered their assistance at this time. And remember that the third eye of Horus was the initial portal bridge that connected to the sphere of Amenti when it had been removed from Earth the first time. And that connection had since been severed, so they needed a new intergalactic bridge. And they formed the Ark of the Covenant 840,000 years ago. It was originally called the Arch of the Covenant of Palador. So this was the portal bridge between Earth and the sphere of Amenti. It was considered a one-way door because souls could descend through the passageway, but they couldn't return to the Amenti morphogenetic field unless they had fifth dimensional coding in their gene structure. So those who had the fifth dimensional coding were said to carry the shield of the Ark. And this was primarily the Muvarians or Melchizedek cloister, so those of the sixth race. And they were also considered to be Earth guardians of sorts. Races 3, 4, and 5 didn't have the fifth DNA strand in their genetic imprint, so they couldn't return through the Ark unless those prior seals that we've talked about were released. All right, so the Ark of the Covenant was self-regulating, and this meant that the Guardians wouldn't have to re-enter the sphere of Amenti themselves when it came time. It depended on the conditions of Earth's planetary grid. So at least 8% of the population had to assemble the fifth DNA strand, and this would permit release of the fifth dimensional seal. So essentially, a certain number of the Melchizedek cloister would have to be born onto the planet. And then Earth's grid vibration could rise. There would be a trigger frequency matchup between the two morphogenetic fields, and the sphere of Amenti could slowly descend back to Earth. So it was supposed to take about 2,000 years to fully descend. It would do this incrementally over time. Those higher energies would progressively become more available to the people of Earth. Race memory would be reinfused over time. And this would ultimately spur the raising of consciousness and stimulate a mass awakening. Remember that the blue flame is Earth's piece of the morphogenetic field of Tara, and the blue flame holds connection to the Ark of the Covenant. So at this time, the mission was to disperse the fifth dimensional frequencies held within the blue flame through the Earth grid via the energetic fields of people. And these people were basically frequency modulators. They came to be known as keepers of the flame. They were assisting humans in catching the morphogenetic wave and ascending. And this dispersion had to be orchestrated in synchronization with the natural time cycles of Earth and also during a period of natural dimensional blending. So the keepers of the flame would receive their infusion of dimensional 5 frequency from individuals called flame bearers or staff holders. And these individuals were female. They carried a fully activated 12-strand DNA package, and they incarnated with a support team of 6 avatars from Harmonic Universe 4. And these avatars were male. During the opening of the Ark of the Covenant, there would also be those known as rod holders, and these individuals were male, and they were appointed to embody the orange gold flame morphogenetic field portion of Earth. Both had to incarnate in proper sequence. So this meant incarnating at the right time periods in conjunction with Earth's time cycles and within appropriate genetic lineages. It would take over 800,000 years to fulfill the Ark of the Covenant promise. And all of this is being done in the name of code activation, right? And this happens quite often, that higher dimensional beings will incarnate as avatars on Earth, carrying a fuller spectrum of light and thus assisting in the raising of consciousness. Meanwhile, the higher collectives were preparing for the third seeding, and they commissioned the Ceres Egyptians and the Hebrews to orchestrate the third seeding. Those races ended up interbreeding with the remaining Lemanians and Urantrians. This new race was called the Uratites, and they brought the priesthood of Ur into play on Earth. They were also considered guardians of the Ark of the Covenant. And the 5 cloister races birthed through the Uratites. They developed in various regions of the globe, Africa, East Asia, North and South America, Central Europe, Egypt, into Iran. And this started about 750,000 years ago until about 75,000 years ago. So there were a few major races that came out of the third seeding, one of them being the Lemurians about 73,000 years ago. And they resided on a continent that no longer exists, but was in a region now covered by the Pacific Ocean. They were also settled in areas of the Andes Mountains. The Atlanteans came around about 70,000 years ago, and they occupied a landmass in a region now covered by the Atlantic Ocean, and they were also linked into parts of Egypt. The Aryans came around about 65,000 years ago. They resided in regions near what is now the Black Sea and the Carpathian Mountains. The Anu Melchizedeks seeded into the Atlantean root race and Egyptian subrace about 68,000 years ago. Their primary concentration was in Atlantis, and they were pretty headstrong about organizing culture around the Law of One. And because these civilizations were prospering, the Atlantean and Lemurian cultures received gifts from advanced stellar races, and they started experiencing rapid technological development They were using large crystalline power generators for energy storage, and this energy was being drawn directly from the blue flame. They were able to neutralize Earth's gravitational pull. They were able to manifest and demanifest objects. They were playing with teleportation and bioenergetic healing. And this was a period of thriving until about 55,000 years ago, when members of the Anunnaki resistance began to infiltrate Atlantean culture. And there was ensuing genetic and social digression that took place. So the Anunnaki resistance groups and their Draco allies infiltrated Atlantean culture. They covertly moved into ranks of the Syrian Council. They generated more genetic distortions by perpetuating the Templar seal amongst these lineages. They distorted the Law of One teachings, and they created a lot of division and social unrest. The Dracos also infiltrated the Lemurian continent of Moirivi, and the Dracos created an extensive tunnel system of underground layers between Atlantis and Lemuria. So humans devised a plan to create small underground explosions about 52,000 years ago in order to confine the Dracos to their lairs. But this plan backfired, and there was a massive explosion of generator crystals that destroyed the landmass of Lemurian civilization and brought about volcanic activity, earthquakes, floods, a period of ice. Most people retreated underground yet again. I'm really sensing a pattern here. Atlantis did not suffer mass destruction, but it did take generations for them to rebuild and for Earth to rebalance her grid. Atlantis again became a cultural center, but it never quite reached its previous height of development. And the Ark of the Covenant was damaged, so they relocated it from Atlantis to Egypt, where the grid structure was more stable. So Egyptian culture was prospering. Egypt became sort of a hub port for the Anu Melchizedeks, the Hebrews, and the Sares Egyptians. And because the Ark of the Covenant was a primary target for the Anunnaki resistance, Egypt became focused in on. Atlantean culture was also being reestablished at the time. Their power generator crystals had been restored, but the Templar Anu were still using their influence to corrupt the priest caste and affect the social and moral climate of the region. They were also making plans to dominate inner Earth. So the Interdimensional Association of Free Worlds and the Assyrian-Arcturian Coalition for Interplanetary Defense were called in to help protect Earth and continue spreading the Law of One teachings, especially in Atlantis and Egypt. The Syrian Council Anunnaki also built bases of operation on Earth's surface, and these were constructed directly over portal regions. This is when and why the pyramids were built. There was also a base or outpost built on Mars as an additional means of keeping an eye out on Earth and sort of as an intimidation tactic, more or less. So the first monument built was the Sphinx about 48,500 years ago. And the Sphinx covered the portal that led to Inner Earth. And it also linked to the passageway that led to the Ark of the Covenant. So it was made to look like the head of an Anunnaki warrior, and they placed that on the body of a lion-like sculpture. So this was meant to be a tribute to the Leonines, and the Leonines were instrumental in the early foundations of Anunnaki culture. So this was basically the Anunnaki making a statement that true Anunnaki heritage stood behind the Anunnaki of the Syrian Council, who followed Law of One teachings. The Sphinx was also a library for sacred texts. It housed energy transmitting machines charged with fifth dimensional energy. And these machines were designed in the shape of an ankh. So the ankh looks like a cross with the top portion holding the shape of a teardrop. You've probably seen that before. So these machines could reverse gravitational pull, they could affect particle makeup and the morphogenetic field of matter. The ankhs were used to create the Sphinx and various other pyramids and structures. They also served as construction tools, weather modulators, healing tools, interdimensional transit devices. And historically, the larger machines became known as the Ark of the Covenant, and the true identity of the Ark of the Covenant, being a portal bridge, was lost. So let's talk about the Great Pyramid of Giza for a moment. This pyramid was directly over the portal to the Ark of the Covenant. It was reconstructed and repaired on numerous occasions, as were many of the pyramids. It was an interdimensional teleportation center, so visiting craft from other star systems could come and go easily. And it was originally designed as a harmonic resonance chamber as well. So it pulled in tremendous amounts of multidimensional frequencies from deep space through the capstone. It was situated in Earth's geographical center point, so within the energy vortex that represented the heart chakra at the time. It was also utilized as an ascension chamber and as a training school for initiates into the Melchizedek and Elohim ascension programs. People accessed the pyramid for healing and for accelerating genetic assembly. And like the Sphinx, Giza led into a passage that also connected into Inner Earth. So the Templar Anu was maintaining a stronghold in Atlantis about 30,000 years ago, and they were using the main crystal generators to tear down energetic barriers that secured the Inner Earth portals. And this excessive use of power caused several explosions. Those explosions were more than 10 times the force of an atomic bomb. And it sent most of the landmass of Atlantean civilization into the sea. So Atlantis was reduced to 3 islands, and these islands were located near what is now the Bermuda Islands. But most of the population was destroyed. Just prior to the explosion, the Syrian Council removed various groups from Atlantis and distributed them around the globe. The Egyptians were also forewarned of the event, and most of the culture retreated underground. The Ark of the Covenant remained stable, but surface conditions were thrown into chaos again. So Earth tilted on its axis. The energetic link broke between Giza and Sirius B. So here we're in the middle of another rebuilding process. Giza was no longer used as an interstellar teleport station after this. And the Templar Anu were pretty upset that there had been so much loss in Atlantis, so they initiated an airstrike on the Mars outpost and on Egypt. And this caused the destruction of many pyramids. The Syrian Council was able to drive the Anunnaki resistance fleet to Nibiru, but they still had to go through another pretty intensive rebuilding process. This time, though, they aligned Giza with Alcyone in the Pleiadian star system. And Atlantis had been taken back over by the Templar Anu at this time. So there was continued rampant power abuse, more genetic experimentation, and they also began using the crystal generators as devices for torture for those who were not in compliance with the Templar teachings. So Earth had undergone too many grid setbacks, and the sphere of Amenti still could not be re-entered into Earth's core at this time. About 22,000 BC or so, Earth began another 26,556-year cycle of evolution, and Earth's morphogenetic waves for ascension are only released during 4 periods during this time cycle. So the first 2 waves occur during the first 4,400 years or so, and the final 2 waves occur in the last 4,400 year segment. And these periods of time are called ascension cycles. When the first 2 waves of ascension happened in the last go-round, the populations were unable to ascend because the halls of Amenti weren't opened up yet. But our next opportunity arose in 2012. So we've been in the middle of an ascension cycle the last 10 years. The teachings of ascension were initially very scientific in nature. They dealt with multidimensional physics, and they were called the science of Kelonta. So Kelontics involves the underlying energetic mechanics through which reality is created, and it includes the processes through which consciousness evolves. So this was publicly taught as the primary belief model around which societies were structured, but these teachings became distorted or destroyed over time. The Templar Anu and the Anunnaki resistance still contaminate human consciousness with their elitist, materialistic, and dualistic creeds today. People who are empowered cannot be controlled or manipulated by outside authorities. So that tool of knowledge was taken away from the masses. And today, a covert form of persecution still exists, much of it within traditional religious organizations whose distorted teachings keep people powerless and subservient to religious authority figures. So the science of ascension was withheld, but the promise of ascension was used to manipulate people into thinking that ascension could be accomplished through blind belief and by obeying politically motivated creeds. And this was not the original intention. So there are a couple schools of thought We've talked about how the law of one revolves around unity consciousness and embodies qualities of love, respect, cooperation, kindness, gentleness, tolerance, power. It includes the equality of all peoples and all genders. It works with healing and integrating aspects of society. There is no good versus evil. So remember that the universe doesn't operate in terms of right or wrong. Evil deeds are seen as the result of ignorance to the true structure of the universe. It is believed that all beings were created to be free, and that we are co-creators with the God force, and that we are individual faces and expressions of God. The distorted Templar Creed, however, looks towards judgment, devaluation, hatred, fear, subservience. They condone the blind worship of outside authority figures. They exploit plant, animal, and mineral kingdoms. They repress the majority for the benefit of the few. And these values have motivated the generation of pain and disease and war and competition and violence. Luckily, the higher harmonic universes have remained loyal in helping humanity awaken to its relationship with the divine creative source. Until about 11,500 years ago, humanity had open relations with advanced ET cultures. There was a particular event that placed Earth in an intergalactic quarantine of sorts, and the previous powers of advanced civilizations became lost. So we'll continue with that topic in the next video.